Most people, they don't want all the things that what we call the medicalization of dying.
No one's looking at employers. How might they treat me when something like this happens unforeseen,
Because the reality is we leave a legacy, good or bad. But the best legacy is when we're intentional about what it is.
Hello, and welcome to the Liberty Spenders podcast. We are Kurt and Kristen Luidhardt, your hosts and co-founders of the Prosper Group, an agency that's raised over $500 million and helped elect over 100 members of Congress, 15 governors, 15 U.S. senators, and 1 president. And now, in addition to helping political candidates get elected, we're helping your business get elected by answering this question. What if you could exponentially grow your business by tapping into a lucrative and engaged audience that we call Liberty Spenders? Now, Liberty Spenders make up 76.5 million people, and they are looking for businesses and brands that align with their values. If you want to learn more about that, you can get access to our new best-selling book at libertyspenders.com/free. But before we start today's episode, I just want to take a moment because today's episode is different, but absolutely critical. As Liberty Spenders, we often build brands around such values like faith, family, and freedom. But what happens when life takes an unexpected turn? What happens when your customers, employees, loved ones, or perhaps even yourself are faced with a diagnosis, a tragedy, or the looming reality of death itself? Are you prepared with the knowledge that you need to support yourself and your loved ones during this time? The conversation we're about to have with Dr. Pamela Pyle, she's the best-selling author of Anticipating Heaven, and we're going to go into a profound conversation about preparing spiritually, practically, and emotionally for life's inevitable transitions. And so if you're committed to serving, as I know you are, if you're listening to this podcast, your family, friends, community, customers authentically, then understanding how to navigate these deep and life-changing experiences are not just important, they're really essential. That's why we're diving into this topic today and why we're so excited to have our guest, Dr. Pamela Pyle. But first, before we officially welcome her, learn a little bit more about her from Kurt.
Yes, Dr. Pyle is a board-certified internal medicine physician, chair of Africa New Life Ministries, and best-selling author of the book, Anticipating Heaven, which we're going to talk about today. Dr. Pyle has spent over 30 years caring for terminally ill patients in United States hospitals and Rwanda clinics. She was one of 3 physicians selected in 1992 by Carolina Health Specialists to begin the first hospital-based internal medicine practice outside of a university setting in the U.S. In 2019, Dr. Pyle began her career as an author, speaker, and thought leader on the intersection of medicine, faith, and hope. She was inspired by a patient who was dying and comforted her with the words, "It's okay. It will be a good death." And she shares, and she'll share with us today, that a good death is not an event, but rather a lifestyle. Cultivating a lifestyle can begin at any stage of life and should be started sooner rather than later. So,
like right now.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be with you guys.
Well, we're very excited to have you. And like Kristen said, this is such an important topic. And immediately when we got our copy of your book, we immediately found very practical advice for stuff that we're dealing with in our own life, with our own family. And so was it attractive for us to help get this book in other people's hands and tell people the story. It's relevant to absolutely everyone. And but for those who don't have Anticipating Heaven, give us a little bit of an overview of the topics you tackle and who should be reading this book.
Well, obviously everybody should be reading this book, but
we agree.
And I say that because a lot of the information that you'll find, the practical information, are things that you can do no matter your age, no matter your health. And in fact, the more you plan by living with the end in mind, the more prepared you are for the unexpected tragedy or the unexpected diagnosis or the call that comes. And the reality is that happens all the time. And having practiced in a hospital-based setting, I was privileged to be with patients in their most difficult times and their families. And what I realized from all those decades of practice is how much I learned through that journey from listening to patient stories, listening to things they would do different, listening to regrets they had, but also things that they were joyful about. And I just began to catalog, those meaningful stories that really the wisdom was not mine. It was all theirs and thousands of patients. And so that was ultimately where a lot of the patient stories came from. Some were also personal, as in friends and family. But I began writing the book after that patient had told me it's okay, it would be a good death. And at the time, I was so moved by her just confidence and her strength, even though she knew her death was imminent. And I just sat there and I began to weep. And that's when she grabbed my hand and made that statement. And she did die the next day. And the reality was, when I exited her room, I knew her confidence was in her destination. She saw all the way through her ending hours and day to her eternal life and in heaven. But God always uses different people in our lives to move us along in our paths, to learn something new, to explore our next purpose. And that phrase really stuck with me, and God actually wouldn't let me go of it. Let it go, because it would wake me in the middle of the night. Well, I know what my best death is, but how do I, as a physician, care for those that are dying or that are ill, and first be a better physician in their suffering? And what does a good death really look like? And you said it in the intro, Kurt, it's not an event. It's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle that, you begin to understand when you examine death closely. It brings clarity to life. And when we have a sense of our own mortality, we begin to live our days so much differently. We don't know what tomorrow holds. We know that it's not promised. Mm-hmm. And we know that somewhere there's a calendar date that is our death date. But we don't like to be reminded, and we don't know when the date is. But there's some true value in how we live our lives and how we prepare for the unexpected, that when it comes, and it always comes, that there's less chaos and fear, and you feel more equipped and prepared. And so the journey through writing the book was very much an exploration of, these are the things that I've learned through 30 plus years in medicine, and how to practically guide with principles of making choices, but then how to plan for the unexpected. And then the second half of the book really focuses in on like all the shifts that occur, transitions, as you called them. I call them paradigm shifts, as we go from healthy to our first diagnosis, mm-hmm. to a disease that causes chronic illness or disability, and ultimately the final paradigm shift where we choose to go from choosing to fight for longer days, but choosing to live more days with quality.
Well, and like you said, it touches everyone because we have a loved one, someone we know, a friend, a family, and it is inevitable for all of us. And so, I love that emphasis on equipping people so that as that happens, when that happens, there is less fear. And you talk about that replacing fear. And, the more we know, that helps us be prepared and that does get rid of the fear. And, it's interesting because, I had made some notes for myself and, also you've shared about there's actual, neuroscience that backs this up. When you're anticipating, you called it anticipating heaven, but anticipating positive experiences, that it activates areas in our brain that make us more joyful, hopeful.
Yes.
And isn't that a beautiful thing for people to have too? So really quick though, the book, it talks about, you mentioned you've got part 1 and part 2, and the first part really gets into so much incredibly helpful practical advice, specifically, navigating hospitals and doctors. What insider tips would you give or share, that you go over with people in the book?
Sir Francis Bacon said that knowledge is power. And that's incredibly true when you're trying to navigate a very foreign world. And so equipping yourself with understanding your healthcare system, even as simple as if you were to call 911, what hospital would you be taken to? Or where should you go for a minor matter versus a more serious matter? How to get multiple opinions if it's a serious diagnosis. And truthfully, we can feel powerless when we're sitting in front of a doctor and they're, and I try not to do this, but it can feel very daunting. It's almost like the white coat is the wall between you and them, or they're on the other side of the desk giving you news, and you're not prepared. That first time, you have no idea what to do. And so I really equip with these are the questions to ask, because you won't know the first time, but you will have your questions to bring in for the second time. And then I always recommend get a second or a third opinion if it's a serious diagnosis. Because, when we think about planning our children's weddings, you guys have children that are too young, but we've done that a few times now. We interview 2 or 3 different wedding planners. Why wouldn't we do the same when we're wanting the best for our health? And the other thing is, it's really important, even when you're young, to find your primary care doctor, because that's someone that the most important thing that you have with them is trust. You trust that they will make a decision that's always in your best interest. And trust is not something that is immediate. It's gained over time. The only other way to gain trust is what I call borrowed trust. And that's where someone that you trusts the physician that they're seeing or clinician. But it takes a while. It's hard to find, the doctors that you want. So I suggest starting early, and I have some guidelines. I'm a big advocate of being board certified in any specialty that you're in, because there's a certain accountability that comes with that and continuing education that's required. And, that's what you want. A trusted doctor that has your best interest and that listens, and allows what's called participatory decision making. He or she's not making the decision for you. You're not making it without any guidance. And there's a place in the middle that leads to the best care.
Well, and even planning financially, you shared this, I learned this from you about, having healthcare costs and, it's a top reason for bankruptcy for people. And so I know there's advice about that as well, about, just trying to think ahead so that, your family isn't, stressed and trying to determine what to do, and the things that you need to prepare for in the case that this may happen.
And my advice on that is, and this is the sad part, is our cost of insurance has gone up exceedingly high, and our incomes haven't kept up just with getting good insurance. And it's hard when a healthcare crisis, even with good insurance, you're still paying deductibles or co-pays, and a simple ride to an ER. I'll use this example, a trauma center. If you fall and break your hip and it's not a trauma center, and you go to the ER, you get x-ray, it's a cost. But if you go to a trauma center and it's a risky fall, then before you hit the door, a lot of times it's $25,000. And it's because they're coordinating a trauma team. And it's a sight to be seen of, surgeons and doctors and nurses and respiratory therapists and, all people from all over the hospital come to the ER to greet you. But if it's a minor accident, you don't want to have that bill. And that happens a lot with minor car crashes, simple things. So that's an easy way to go down a very steep road to getting underwater with healthcare costs. But there is some hope that I think for listeners that may be there already working, you can work with hospital systems to manage the debt or reduce the debt, and oftentimes pay it out over an extended period of time. Sometimes when we get those bills, we tend to want to just hide them. And, if we don't have money for food, we're not even thinking about that. But you are also trying to protect your credit. Another good thing that just happened in January is the Consumer Financial Protection Agency just made it into law, activated it, where medical debt doesn't come on a credit report. So much of medical debt keeps people previously from having a car or getting a home, requiring loans for other reasons, a credit card. So that one thing is going to make a big difference in Americans' lives. But planning ahead, but also being wise, with healthcare dollars. Asking questions like, do I need this test? Is there another way to do this test that is less expensive? Does doing the test change my outcome? And that's the most often case where a lot of times, especially in hospital settings and even in doctor settings, we're doing tests that won't necessarily change an outcome, but it will have a significant cost to the patient. And if we don't ask the question, it's easier for the doctor to order the test. It also protects them because they've ordered all the tests.
Are they doing it just to confirm a diagnosis? Or, I mean, I don't want to get political on this, but of course, it just sounds fascinating because you could spin this of like, well, it's more money and, they get compensated by all those things. So what would be the reason? I mean, is it liability coverage because they've ordered those things?
I would say the biggest reason is liability coverage. If you can do an ultrasound and get a diagnosis that might miss 2% of something going on, or an MRI and miss 0.5%. Yeah, it's a very small margin, but at least you'll have the information to ask the question, and you can make an informed decision. It's not that the doctor should make that, but they should give you the information precisely and how it affects your care. But I really feel like we live in such a litigious society, and I don't think tort reforms will ever pass, and therefore a lot of hospitals and medical centers and clinical staff, they practice with that idea, if I do all these things, I'm less likely to get sued.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's just interesting. I mean, that little insight and advice alone is worth its weight in gold. Asking those questions about, do I need this test? Will it change you would just assume that, of course it does. That's why the doctor's asking for it. It wouldn't occur to me.
It wouldn't occur to me
otherwise to ask those questions.
And we tend not to ask. And so that's why I'm really understanding that knowledge is power, and you need power as you're navigating, all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And this is never more true than when we're reaching the end of our life. The average American spends $80,000 in healthcare bills the last year of life.
Wow.
And oftentimes they end up dying in the hospital, in places that if someone had had the conversation with them early, or else they had been able to make the decisions about what mattered to them at the end of life, they wouldn't make a decision to be on machines. They wouldn't make a decision to die in the hospital. And especially our older generations, they are so concerned about leaving burdens to their children. And the reality is, unfortunately, they are. And that's because no one's had the questions to ask or done the planning ahead that helps them make right choices at the right time. And most people, they don't want all the things that what we call the medicalization of dying, because a lot of times that's just prolonging suffering. It's not changing outcomes.
Well, and that's why this topic's so important.
It is. And I didn't start out, I took one English class in college because I had to. Yeah. So I wasn't a writer, but I felt God called me to this, and he deserves the glory because he brought a great agent who became my agent because he went through cancer and shouldn't have survived, but he did. And a great publisher. Again, I'm just here telling a story because it's an important one, and we all have stories, and we all could be used regardless of where we are in life.
You've hinted at this a couple of times, but I wanted to get a little more specific. It's an idea of planning ahead or thinking about this now, not waiting until later. And I thought about the things that you would direct people to plan now? What are the things that we should be thinking about before there's a diagnosis for us or our family member? I think you talk about the concept of the 5 wishes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought I'd let you get into that a little bit.
Yes. So the 5 wishes is one example of an advanced care plan, but it's actually my favorite, and it's called the Advanced Care Plan with a Heart and a Soul. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but it basically is a document that includes a living will, and healthcare power of attorney, helps you go through certain experiences where you may not be able to speak on your behalf, and who would make those decisions, and what would you want them to be. And what I describe it, it's a way to have your voice heard when no one may be able to hear you talking. It allows your autonomy to be existent in the places that it needs to be. And your voice is the most important. So the wishes also include how you would want things like pain management, end of life care. But what I especially love, it talks about what's meaningful to you and what do you want your family to know about that meaning. And actually just going through the process of thinking about that, regardless of your age, well, what is meaningful to me?
Mm-hmm.
What do I consider a meaningful life? What would I want my legacy to be? Because the reality is we leave a legacy, good or bad. But the best legacy is when we're intentional about what it is. And so I highly recommend a personal legacy statement, a family legacy statement, thinking about what will exist beyond your time here. And we really are here so brief. Billy Graham's question or answer to a question in his 60s was, what is the most valuable thing that you've learned at this point in your life? And he said, life is brief, the brevity of life. And the older I get, the more aware I am of that fact of it's New Year's Day and then I'm putting up Christmas decorations again, and it's just like nothing in between. It just passes so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So doing that early is good. And I recommend what's called a generational generosity gathering. And that's bringing the older generations, your children, maybe your grandchildren, coming together and talk about like the sense of what do they hear or what are their fears about death. And it really takes an advocate in the family to be bold, and to bring the topic up. But the 5 Wishes has really good resources of how to start the conversation in your family. And the beauty is when you're doing it together, it's not so scary. And when you're not in a crisis, it's really just a conversation we all need to have. And then when the crisis comes, you will be able to look to that document and not have the fear of making a wrong choice because it's already been made.
Well, there's a bold one in every family. So, you just, if you're not that one, you just get this book in the hands of that person and then just a little nudge.
It's usually, my age group. We're called the sandwich generation because we're processing our parents and our own health, especially. And then, our children, think they're immortal. But, they need to be in this discussion as well. And truthfully, it's also a great opening for talking about faith, what you believe and why you believe it and why it matters to talk about it.
Hey, business owners, did you know there's 76.5 million faith-based and conservative consumers that are looking to support brands that align with their values?
That's a $5 trillion opportunity, and if you're not tapping into it, you're leaving money on the table. Our new book, Liberty Spenders, is your ultimate guide to reaching this influential audience using conviction-driven marketing.
That's right. We break down real-world strategies that successful brands are using right now to connect with this audience authentically, build trust, and drive long-term business growth.
So if you're truly serious about standing out in today's crowded market, grab your copy today on Amazon or visit libertyspenders.com. And don't miss out on this revolutionary strategy called conviction-driven marketing.
And I mean, because you hit on this, which is that, most people fear death or they avoid talking about it. It's uncomfortable. But I think you've touched on this about this concept of a good death. And it changes, I think, how we think about legacy, to your point, and what does that mean and what do we really care about? Again, it's why I think this is relevant for everyone, but for any business owner who's thinking, who's listening to this and thinking about that, I mean, we think about that from our business, what do we want ultimately for our business? What do we want to have available for our children? And we may not think about what may be the downside, and how to prepare for that exit. We think about how do we want to exit our business? But this is just as important.
Could I just address that with your business owner audience? One of the things that is really valuable in just understanding this as for you and your family, but also as a business owner, there's so many loss of days of work when an individual is sick or when they're caring for a family member that is sick. And equipping your employees with just this understanding of doing these things. One, they will feel valued by you, that you cared enough to care for the things that they might not have thought of. I do have a course with Indiana Wesleyan coming out that is specifically for business owners to talk about all the things, including the 5 wishes, but also healthy longevity, which, we want ourselves to be healthy, but we also want our employees to live healthy lives. So it's kind of a HR value add for any business that is wanting to go the extra mile for their employees, and they'll have happier employees. And there's a white paper out that I could send that you actually have less loss of days from work after completing the 5 wishes.
That's incredible. And it absolutely is a value add because, again, no one's looking at employers. How might they treat me when something like this happens unforeseen? You might have some kind of a medical leave or, but yeah, I love that. And I'm so excited that Indiana Wesleyan is partnering with you on this. And I can't wait for it to be
I am too.
completed.
I love them. I know it's your alma mater. It's my husband's alma mater as an honorary doctorate, which we joke about that.
Yeah. You're like, yeah, it's honorary for sure.
Yeah.
And Kurt's, promoting it with his water mug here. Yeah. So they smartly.
I'm an IWU fan too. I have an IWU leash on my service dog, and I'm every picture I take, I make sure the IWU leash is shown.
Yeah.
That's a gift from Jerry Pattengell, our common friend.
Yeah.
I know. Anytime we can give him a shout out, that's always a good thing.
Absolutely.
He's amazing.
I do want to talk about that business owner thing, if no other reason than to make the point that we've had employees now approaching 20 years, mm-hmm. and we've not done this exercise. But I as you're talking, I'm starting to name in my head the employees that we've had over the years that I know have had these moments you're talking about, a parent, sibling, close friend, somebody going through a crisis or somebody passing away. And I've never thought about supporting them in any way other than giving them the time off they need. But I really can count a lot of people, including a lot of our more senior employees who are still with us that, would have, went through this stuff and perhaps would have benefited from understanding the process better and feeling some support. And so I agree with you.
Do it within the business, and then that employee is the advocate in their family. It changes a business, then an individual, and then the family, and hopefully communities. And a lot of my hope for this book is that it's used within the church to equip the church with the practical tools to care for each other and care for the sick, but also the spiritual tools of what's the most important preparation, which is, our soul preparation, and how to do that, and how to share the gospel with others. And then how to do that beyond the walls of the church. Because there are hurting people everywhere, and lost people everywhere, and sick people everywhere. So when we anticipate, going back to that word, like I anticipate God will reveal someone to me today to pray for or share the gospel with. I've never been turned down for prayer, ever. And it's, partly I think it's because I try to start my day with the Holy Spirit to not step on anybody's shoes. But also, when you look in someone's eyes, you can tell when someone's hurting. And it's such a precious opportunity that we have.
Yeah, you bring to mind a special series of sermons that we did at our church, maybe 6-8 months ago. And the idea was evangelism, but there was an interesting exercise our church put together. They invited 4 people to come, 4 very brave people to come, and they were interviewed on stage. They were people who professed to not be of faith. So they weren't Christians. They were there just for us to hear their perspective. Mm-hmm. And I think without exception, all 4 of them mentioned something that they, if they had a bad experience with someone of faith, it has been that when they were in a crisis regarding a death, one young lady had lost her daughter, and of course it's awkward. What do you say to somebody who's going through that? And the Christians they met had just sort of kind of Hallmark type things to say, right? And it didn't.
Everything happens for a reason, or
that's the worst
some
thing.
Expression like that, and it's like I know where I understand what you're trying to say, but do not say that.
But so to your point about these are
equipping
equipping people to know how to talk about these things, and also the opportunity to share the love of Christ through it, and to do it effectively. It's so important.
Yes, and I'll say when I became a believer in my 30s, had been a doctor about 7 years at that point. And so I was just so amazed, at this Jesus. And I thought everybody needs to get this Jesus that saved me. And I was such a wretch. I knew my spiritual poverty, and he saved even me, and how I felt afterwards. But all I knew, I went to a pastor, and he said, well, you do the Romans road. And so that was my gospel sharing. I even would take people's names down and like pray for them afterwards. But I was kind of disappointed in my like in the moment results. And God had to really take me through a deep season of suffering, of like stripping me of all the things that were external to really show me that he needed my identity to be in Christ. He understood my heart for sharing. But I was thinking I was the one saving them with the right words. And then if they didn't get saved, then it was the wrong words. But what he really revealed to me is, you're not saving them. You're just stepping into the room and pray to me, what words to say. And sometimes I'm going to say, no, don't say anything. And sometimes I'll give you words. And then sometimes you just get to stand there and I'm going to do it all. And that's the most fun. But, we get so paralyzed by like, saying the wrong thing or the right thing. And we just
It's
get
all
to
him.
plant seeds. It's all him.
We don't actually have that much power.
I know.
It's such a, we have such a, it's not intended to be that way, but such an inflated view of our, our own abilities.
And we when we start having like this, Christianese conversations, we make mistakes, around grieving people and suffering people. And the Holy Spirit doesn't make mistakes. But there are several things that you should say and should not say. I'm going to say there's more things you should not say. The best thing to say is, I don't know what to say, but I'm going to sit here and be with you. And when you need to talk, I'm here.
You mentioned this, but I was going to ask you, we were going to ask you about your faith journey. You mentioned that you became a Christian in your 30s. And I also think Scott also kind of a little later as well and had a big experience that led him to faith. Talk a little bit about that, because it seems like there's a great story of God working in your lives there.
So Scott and I think he probably gave his testimony before. But neither one of us were Christians when we got married. And we got married for all the wrong reasons, but wow, were we madly in love. And got married, within 6 months of meeting each other. And he was the wild and crazy guy that picked me up on a Kawasaki motorcycle for our first date. And I was just like, this is my guy.
I can't even picture this.
Super fast.
I can't. And for those listening, we have interviewed her husband, Scott Pyle, before, so you should check out that episode. It's amazing. But that is wild.
I know. Lime green. I can still see it. We just rode so fast. And that was kind of the first 2 years of our marriage. We were had just finished my residency. We moved to South Carolina. And, for the first time, we had a little bit of money. We got turned down for a furniture rental company in Texas after we got married, because we were so poor. But when we had money, then, you start experiencing the world differently. And for him, what he saw the world becoming is more and more hollow despite the money. And Jesus really was chasing him. And he chased him all the way into an episode where we didn't know he was going to survive. He had lost a lot of blood and was unconscious. And his description of that experience was, he felt like his existence, his soul being ripped from him. And it was dark and cold.
Mm.
And the only thing he knew, because he had grown up in the church for a lot of reasons, too long to go into here, he left. And he remembered this scripture: every knee will bow, every tongue confess, every knee will bow, every tongue confess. Lord, please don't let this be my last. Will you save me? And my husband woke up and he was a transformed man.
Wow.
But I wasn't very happy. Because remember, I married the wild and crazy guy. And I had no experience with faith and church or any of that. And I really, if you'd asked me, I'd have put Jesus with Santa Claus and Tooth Fairy. and so when he starts talking about Jesus, and he's like intensely changed. I, being a doctor, no faith, thought he had some kind of brain injury when he was unconscious because of blood loss, stroke or something. I made him go to the medical university in Charleston, 2 hours south of here, to get checked out.
Maybe we still wonder something's not right up there, but for different reasons.
And the doctor at the end says, nothing's wrong with your husband, Dr. Pyle. He had a spiritual experience, and it's real. And we looked back on that conversation and thought, he must have been a Christian when he said that. But for 2 years, Scott prayed for me. He was a new man in the Lord. And I was still pretty angry about it. But one time, we were in a fight. It's actually me probably yelling at him. And I can remember it so clearly because we were like sitting next to each other at the breakfast table, so close, but so far apart. And he grabs my hands and he says, I don't care what you say to me. I don't care what you do to me. I will never leave you, and I'll always love you. And it was the first time that I thought, Jesus must be a good guy. Because that's what my experience with how men were. And so a month later, we're on a beach and he's leaving on a dive boat. I'm by myself and looking for something to read. And in his dive bag, or his bag, was a book called God of My Father. I now know that the author was a pretty famous author, but the only reason Scott had it was the father lived about 15 minutes from where we live. And it was all about his father's faith and the God of his father. And his father's faith withstood tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. Children dying, wife dying. He still had peace. And I sat there as I finished that, and I was like, I've never known that kind of peace. And I just dropped to my knees and I just said, Lord, I'm so sorry for all the things I said, I did, talked about you, didn't believe in you. I don't know, but I just need your peace. Will you forgive me? Honestly, to this day, I can feel it like it's yesterday because it felt like a rain shower of peace. And I was bawling so much that, Scott comes back and he thinks something terrible's happened. And I'm running up to the dive boat. I'm like, Jesus saved me. He saved even me. So if he can save me, if you're listening, he can save you too.
Amen. Yep.
Yeah. We will be asking about the Kawasaki at some other point to Scott. And I think, maybe that's part of what's led you to be really active in these medical mission trips to Africa. And you founded it helped or part of the founding of a hospital in Rwanda. And I thought before we start coming to a close, I'd love to hear about that project and what inspired you to work on it.
So I mentioned the season of suffering, when God taking me out of the picture and putting Christ in my identity. It was a place that I couldn't even pray. And so I would get up in the middle of the night and lay my head in the Bible, and God would meet me there. And a friend knew what I was going through, and she said, "Why don't you come with me to Rwanda? And, we're going on a medical mission trip and it'll be good for you." And I went there, and, I've always had dreams of doing medical missions after I became a Christian. And you think you're going there to give so much, but what you realize is how much more you get when you're serving, people that need healing, both physical healing and spiritual healing. And at the end of the week, God said, "This is your place and this is your purpose." And so we were working in a church, a part of Africa New Life Ministries. And I went to the founder of the ministry and the executive director. And I said, "Have you all thought about a medical clinic? I see all these people walking for hours to see us." And Pastor Charles, he's now Dr. Charles, he's like, "Yes." I mean, he's such a visionary. He's an incredible visionary, both he and his wife. And so I came home, told Scott, and we raised the money to buy the land right next to where the church is. It's now called the Dream Center. It has a seminary and so many other things. And I thought, okay, we're going to build a clinic and it's going to be easy. But the lesson I learned is with God and his dreams, they're always bigger than ours. And he always makes us wait on him. And when we wait on him and trust him, then he makes something so much bigger and better than we could ever have imagined. So I ended up joining the board in 2011 and just started bringing medical teams. At that time, we had about 4,000 kids we cared for, and prayed every time at the board, "Please let this clinic come to pass." And I think I was the only board member that cried. I was the first female too. But
no correlation. No correlation.
Well, Pastor Charles had that vision. It wasn't in the ministry's direct line of vision. But then I was able to start telling him the stories of how many people were saved by health evangelism.
Mm-hmm.
And this beautiful board of wise elder gentlemen who'd been with the ministry from the beginning saw that vision. And as they said yes, money came in, and Project Cure was one of our early donators of medical equipment. And so now it's the second largest private hospital in Rwanda. And we see about 70,000 patients per
my
year.
Goodness.
And we've been open since 2018. So it's, when you see God do things like that, and then he tells you to write a book, you're like, I can write a book. Sure. You tell me, and I don't even mind how long it took. I mean, it was a long time, but I mean, when God's in it, it's just like so much fun. And my heart is still with that ministry. I just stepped down from chair of the board in December, but I love it, love it, love it. And I just want to highlight it. www.africanewlife.org. Go to their website. There's so many ways to get involved, including coming to Rwanda with me on a trip.
Well, it's amazing. And I know how hard you've worked on this book. And I was showing this to you before we aired, but I've got it marked up. I've got it dog-eared in multiple places, and it is very, very, very good. So we highly recommend it. And I know, Kurt, we're going to come to your favorite part of every episode.
Yeah, we always do a quick lightning round. 3 questions, 90 seconds each. And here we go.
Okay.
Something a little different.
I forgot the questions. I saw that.
Yeah,
This will be fresh.
Well, and you're gonna have easy answers to these. So
okay.
it's 90 seconds on the legacy you're hoping to leave behind.
I want the legacy to be that my children will know the Lord and that they will have a desire to serve Him in all that they do. And they teach that to their children.
And that's a good answer. The second question is 90 seconds on any topic that's sort of off topic. So it's not related to the book or your work in hospitals, but something that maybe has caught your eye or interest lately. Maybe you got a new book, some insight.
Okay, so this is a fun fact. I am South Carolina's state powerlifting champ. And
what?
Yeah. and this is my encouragement. So from 2019 to 2022, I couldn't walk without a cane or wheelchair or crutches, depending on where I was in a series of multiple surgeries on my legs. And I've always been goal oriented, and I was a marathon runner, before all that. So I was really limited in what I could do. So I started thinking, well, I'm going to try and learn to bench press my weight. And, you don't do that.
As one does.
You don't do that in one day. But it's a journey. And then I had a trainer that I was working with, and he's like, how old are you? At the time I was 61. And he said, wow, you could actually win. And then that was December. And he said, I said, well, I want that, my goal. I want to win the bench press contest at state. And I had a knee replacement in February, and that got me back to walking. And before long, I was squatting and deadlifting. And so, I went to the contest really just glad to be there. Fortunately, there was this young high school girl that took me under her wings of okay, you go there, you do this. Terrified, but in fact, I actually was so terrified. I was in the bathroom when they first called my squats. So while I lifted the weight, I didn't go, I wobbled the bar. So I didn't win that. I did win deadlift, but there wasn't an individual category. And I did do my bench press. So I got a little, plaque, and the message is, you're never too old to learn something new. And the second message is, powerlifting is extremely good for bone density and one of the best activities to do for women of my age.
Wow. Well, there we go.
That was probably more than 90 seconds. You don't even have to ask me the last question.
It was interesting. For a moment there, I thought, well, this is a candid camera episode.
Yeah.
I thought she was going to talk about how she discovered somebody has her name and there was some mix-up. I did not expect that. That was a total treat.
That's
one of my biggest.
That's why we asked that
fun
question.
facts about Pamela.
Yeah,
I'll jump off anything. Don't dare me because I will do it.
Well, I mean, that's why we started asking that question.
I love that question
because we get. I mean, we had one gentleman do 20 minutes on this American flag he bought, but it was absolutely fascinating.
It was riveting.
I thought we should have done the whole episode on that. And so, that's really cool. And so, last 90-second answer would be, if you had only 90 seconds to talk to someone about your book, Anticipating Heaven, what should they know?
I would say that this is a book about the gospel, uniquely disguised as a medical resource book that you will need at some point in your life. I recommend reading it once through, and then you'll find out all the things that you should do now, regardless of your health. But if you're especially entering a healthcare journey with a serious illness, or you're going through your final diagnosis, you will find the most important thing that's in the book, and that is hope. And the hope that we can have from anticipating heaven.
Yeah.
I'm going to read a quick section from this, which was hard to pick, but I think it's a great way to close this. So you've heard us reference this if you're listening or watching, but there's a number of patient stories in here that are so impactful. I recommend having a box of tissue handy when you read this. It's, but here's one of the stories, was entitled, Goodbye, My Love. I'm ready, he finally announced to his wife. I know where I'm going, and I'm ready to get there. The last sentence was expelled with every effort given. He had lived anticipating heaven for some time. He had no fear, just confidence. With tears sliding down her cheeks, she gave a nod that was nearly imperceptible. She was ready to let him go. His wife held his hand that afternoon until a nurse called me back into the room. We watched his heart rate slow and finally stop. And as Mrs. G gave Mr. G one last kiss, her tears were gone. His long struggle and suffering were over, and it was time for rest for both husband and wife. Mr. G's death was one of the bravest I have witnessed. I pray that my death will be so courageous. I pray that I will have a song in my heart and God's name on my lips. I also pray for every person who reads these words who is facing the end, that you can step confidently into eternity, praising your way home.
Mm.
And if that doesn't make you want to pick this up and read it, you're crazy anyway. But it's such a treat having you on.
Thank you,
Pamela. And this book has ministered to me and my family already in the short time that we've known you and had access to it. And so I really can't recommend and encourage people to get it for yourself. Someone you know, if not you immediately, will be blessed by this and will need it. And so encourage you guys to do that.
Thank you.
We just thank you for joining. Anyone who wants to get in touch with Dr. Pyle, hit her up at www.drpamela.com.
And thank you guys for tuning in. We know your time is precious. If you found value in this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss anything in the future. And again, you can learn more about our offering at libertyspenders.com. Until next time.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Liberty Spenders Podcast. If you're a business owner, we hope today's conversation gave you valuable insights on how to grow your business.
If you enjoyed the show, do us a favor. Hit like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. It really helps us reach more entrepreneurs and leaders like you who are ready to make an impact.
And write something flattering, because I read them all. Don't forget to grab your copy of Liberty Spenders too, available now on Amazon and at libertyspenders.com. It's packed with proven strategies to help you reach the 76.5 million consumers who are looking for brands that share their values.
We'll see you next time as we continue exploring how to grow your business with purpose and conviction.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next episode and the one after that.